Hello, and welcome to the Marble Security Podcast. I'm the host of the program, Dave Jevons. Joining me today is a senior security researcher from Marble Security, Ryan Noonan. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thank you for having me on.
Today is a special podcast. We're going to be doing our 2013 Year of Security Review. We're going to be talking about the major incidents and trends in security, both on mobile and internet and payments. Let's get started. I think issue number one for the year would have to be the revelations about NSA data snooping and the extent to which they're doing that globally.
You know, I think one of my favorite phrases was, they're not looking for a needle in a haystack. They're looking for the whole haystack.
Yeah. I mean, the allegations, of course, were that they're in many email accounts of government officials and company folks all around the world. They have direct taps into data centers in European Google data centers and Yahoo data centers, where they're able to track all the mail and all the documents coming in and out of those systems. And then just recently, in the last few weeks, we had a new revelation that they have basically gotten into over 50,000 networks around the world through various means, malware insertion, breaking in through routers, etc., and breaking into websites. And they're actively monitoring over 50,000 networks of both companies, ISPs, government agencies around the world.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You know, when you think about as much data as the NSA gets, to me, they could pretty much take that data, rewind it, and develop a really complex data model of the personal interactions that anyone does to pretty much anyone else using technology. It's quite amazing.
Well, that's certainly got a lot of people spooked in industry. You can imagine some of those companies that have had their networks tapped into are none too pleased. We're seeing some companies in the crypto industry shutting down some services like encrypted email because of demands for exposing that information. And yet, conversely, we're seeing a lot of other companies adding secure messaging capabilities into their products to manage end-to-end encryption.
Yeah, you know, one of the email services I read about recently was Lavasoft. They're famous for being the email provider that Snowden used. Just recently, I think within the last month, they're going to be rolling out a encrypted email service for the personal market. You know, on their heels also, we heard that Microsoft is coming out with their own version of encryption that'll work with many other email services. And then there was Google, who upped their encryption scheme from 1024 to 2048.
Yep.
That came up.
They'll be rolling that out early in 2014.
Right.
The latest wacky news that we saw concerning NSA and CIA and FBI is that they're paying agents to sit out on World of Warcraft all day and try to look for spies and other insurgents that might be using WoW to collaborate.
You know, when I first read that, I thought it was funny. I chuckled a little bit myself. But then again, you know, we have seen over the past 2 years that criminals have been using like TeamSpeak and the Xbox Live communication to communicate, because they see that as an unmonitored channel of communication. So part of me thinks that perhaps they're onto something, although another part of me thinks that there's some really smart guys at the NSA that want to level up their characters and get paid for it at the same time.
Well, word is that oftentimes what they think they're finding some nefarious activity inside of World of Warcraft, it's actually agents from another three-letter agency who are doing the exact same thing, and they're spying on each other.
That's right, and they had to set up a department for demarcation lines to make sure they weren't spying on the wrong individuals.
Yeah, funny stuff. Well, Ryan, let's move on to security threat trend number 2 that we saw in 2013, and that's large-scale password thefts. Now, 2 that come to mind that we should talk about are the Adobe customer password breach and the Cupid Media password breach. Let's start with Adobe.
Well, the interesting thing about Adobe was that Adobe moved to a SaaS model for their products earlier this year. So all of the customers who currently use or have ever used Adobe products have their passwords stored in a central database.
So attackers basically got into Adobe systems, probably through phishing or malware of one of the employees, who then, basically is given out his password or had a remote controlled Trojan installed on his computer inside the network. And from there, they jumped around and managed to steal source code to all their apps that they sell, as well as the customer database of tens of millions of users.
Tens of millions of users. And to make it worse, those passwords were encrypted. Normal security practices, when you have a password, it's salted and hashed with an irreversible hash so that if someone can't just go back and get that password.
Now, salting means that if you and I had the same password, they would actually appear encrypted differently in the file, so you wouldn't be able to know that you and I had the same password.
Yeah, that's correct. It also adds, you can think of it as a buffer to the end of the password. So if you have a short password, it makes it the right length, and it generally makes your password much more secure.
Now, that's not exactly new technology, because I remember in grad school looking at the Unix operating system, and that's been around since 1973 or so. And way back then, they were salting and hashing all the users' passwords, but that's not what Adobe did, was it?
No, it isn't. They decided to forego 40-year-old industry practices and go with the scheme of encrypting all the user passwords with one encryption key.
So that means that if an attacker were to either derive that key or, we don't know, they may have stolen it. Since they stole the source code and the database, the chances of them getting access to that one key seem pretty high to me. That would mean they could decrypt everybody's password who's ever used an Adobe product.
That's right. So if you've ever used an Adobe product, please change your password.
Well, and if you've ever used that password anywhere else, you best go change it. And we recommend changing all your passwords.
Oh, that's absolutely right.
Now, that's not the most egregious lack of security at a major company, is it?
No, it's not. Earlier in the year, we heard about an attack on Cupid Media. They run a multitude of dating sites. Some of them are niche, some of them are very well used. And Dave, how many passwords were stolen?
I think it was around 42 million passwords were stolen. The announcement came out on November 8th of 2013 about this password theft, the database of all this passwords and user information, usernames, email addresses, etc. Now, what encryption scheme did Cupid Media use for their passwords?
You know what? I'm thinking about it, and I'm drawing a blank here. Oh, yeah, now I remember. They didn't.
They didn't encrypt them at all. All these 42 million passwords are floating around on the internet in plain text.
That's right. So tell your friends who are on these dating sites, again, change their password. Be careful of what services they use, and be mindful of the companies you submit your password to.
Well, the interesting thing was there's already been analysis of what were the most popular passwords, and things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and password were among the most popular passwords used.
Yeah, whenever you see a large password list, you download it from the internet. That's what people use. Or Let Me In is another currently used one. These are things that typically don't change. So if your mom's using her computer over this holiday break, and you see her typing in the password, please let her know that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or password is not sufficient.
Right. And again, use different passwords at different websites. Don't use an algorithm that's easy to guess. And I think this is far from the end of large-scale password data breaches we're going to see, isn't it?
I don't think it's going to stop.
Well, our third interesting trend for cybercrime and hacking in 2013 is something that didn't make that much news, but it's increased attacks on banking systems and on users of those banking systems. Now, we've known for years that consumers have been phished and had malware targeted at their computers to get their passwords to online banking. We've seen in the last few years that corporate customers have been a major target. So small to medium-sized businesses where they'll get onto the finance person's computer and then they can log into their online banking system. And corporations, typically can wire transfer large amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, $500,000, $1 million sometimes. We haven't heard a lot about it in the media this year, but what we've been seeing here at Marble Security is a real uptick in banks coming and purchasing products to protect their end users from this type of malware attack.
Oh yeah, it has been an uptick. Like you mentioned earlier, the mass media hasn't been covering it as much. It's still something for all of our users or listeners out there to be aware of. The big harbinger of this to me is I've heard of banks paying their users $20 to install anti-malware tools. When was the last time you heard of a bank giving money out to anyone?
Yeah. In fact, my bank is one of those that offers me money to install anti-malware protection on my device. And we've got banks that are Marble customers that are giving out Marble access on mobile devices and on PCs to protect users from exactly these attacks. So there's definitely been an increase in 2013. I would expect to see it increase more in 2014. However, at the end of the podcast, we're going to wrap up with some interesting statistics on another form of payments-related fraud, which grew incredibly in 2013. And that, of course, will be our Bitcoin review at the end of the podcast. The fourth trend that we saw in 2013 were increased attacks on healthcare companies and in the educational markets. Now, in healthcare, we've seen attacks that have stolen patient records, have stolen password databases out of healthcare provider companies. With the advent of Obamacare, we saw two things. One was that they launched these sites, the Obamacare sites, without completing a security review. That caused a big brouhaha up on the Hill, didn't it?
It did. It's like these sites came online. They weren't powerful enough to support all the users looking for healthcare, and they not being properly hardened or reviewed, to me, was just plain negligent. They should have spent the time to make a system where people are going to be putting in private information to just general industry standards, and they didn't do it.
Well, in one of our podcasts in October 2013, we talked about another threat, which was there wasn't a good centralized place to validate the legitimacy of the sites that were part of the Obamacare network where you could sign up. And we posited that, in fact, this would cause a problem where criminals would set up sites, fake sites, that would effectively collect all your personal information, social security numbers, and they really weren't legitimate healthcare sites. Turns out that prediction was fairly prescient, wasn't it?
It was. Over the past couple months, they have shut down 70 fake sites. I've just mentioned briefly about needing security reviews and hardening of sites, but when you can get someone to log into your site and put in their information willingly, that's a whole lot easier than hacking any other site and taking the data.
Right. Another healthcare related thing that we found is, as we've been analyzing more and more apps, both Android and iPhone apps, we and some other vendors have found recently at least some medical apps, some apps that send data, for example, for drug prescriptions, that type of thing, are sending it in the clear, not encrypted. And these are legitimate apps. But if you were to sit at a Starbucks on your Wi-Fi network there, anyone in that Starbucks would be able to sniff all your information, including your passwords, know what drugs you were taking, when you were to take them, etc. So we're starting to see that, we've got to be mindful about the security of the apps that we use and start to get informed about exactly what they're doing with our data.
Yeah, that's really important. Something as benign sounding as a flashlight was recently shut down by the FTC because they were sending personal information out. What would a flashlight need with my contact list.
You mean those little flashlight apps that basically like light up so your phone lights up white and you can unlock the house at nighttime?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why does that need to know who my mom is?
Well, it's interesting that the Federal Trade Commission actually managed to detect this stuff, obviously through consumer complaints, and shut it down and has filed a suit against the creators, Golden Shores Technologies, and their app is the Brightest Flashlight mobile app for Android. So if you've got that, get it off your phone right away and get yourself something that maybe doesn't steal all your personal information.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about what's gone on in the education markets. We've been seeing targeted attacks against staff at universities, typically research staff, professors, and the IT staff. And these attacks have typically been starting off with a phishing email and then encouraging people to install new security software on their computers or devices, new apps, security apps, new anti-spam systems, and they're all a ruse to get people to give out their VPN passwords or to install malicious code on their devices.
You know, that's general spear phishing attacks. I see this as analogous to corporate espionage. You know, you can go after corporate research and development and really cause some big damage and theft. What we're seeing is it's against education. You know, these are typically, at least in the United States, have been our big research homes where a lot of core IP that generates a tremendous amount of value in the market is made there. You know, I'm not surprised that they're attacking the education market, although to me, I think that's an area that perhaps needs a little bit more education about security.
And budget, you know. A lot of these places don't necessarily have huge IT teams. You know, they're spending it on faculty and that type of thing. Now, we've also seen insider attacks, which we're seeing a number of examples of schools, school districts that give out iPads or other tablets to their students. And oftentimes they try to lock those down with sort of a standard MDM type of product. And we've actually seen students hacking those and breaking it so that they can download whatever apps they want in violation of the school's policies, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. You know, you give an iPad to a kid, what do they want to do? They want to chat with their friends, they want to play Angry Birds, you know, or Clash of Clans. And if they lock it down, of course, they're going to do their best to make sure that they can use the device the way they want to.
Right. All right, play those games, kids. Well, let's move on to the biggie here. This is the fifth major trend that we saw in security and attacks and crime in 2013. It was really the year of mobile threats. Let's talk about the different kinds of things we've seen. Well, first one we've seen is a large increase in malicious applications. So not just flashlight apps that take a bunch of your personal data and send it up to somebody else to go use it, but also malicious apps that, for example, will send out expensive SMS messages so criminals are making money. We've seen a number of apps that we've analyzed that pretend to be a game or something like that, but are copying your address book out and sending it to criminal sites, taking passwords and sending them out to criminal sites, that type of thing. So a big increase in mobile malware, primarily on the Android platform. However, you know, there is malware on every platform.
There is, and I think one of the big reasons why we've seen it so much on Android is because you can easily take a phone that's not rooted and install an application from any source. You go into the security, you turn off the security setting for install applications from somewhere other than Google Play. So, I mean, I'm really not surprised. Plus, there's a multitude of different markets aside from Google Play for downloading applications.
Sure, there are. And, you know, there's this, as you said, side loading is what a lot of this is called, pulling it not just from Play, but from other places that don't really necessarily validate those apps. Certainly, we've seen malicious code primarily on the iPhone and iPad. It's from jailbroken devices. What we've seen is, my estimates are that about 7.5% to 8% of actively used iPhones are jailbroken. And that statistic comes from looking at the number of active in a given month iPhones, which is around 300 million right now. and the number of times Cydia is downloaded and is activated, and that's running at about 22 million per month active Cydia users. So the actual number of jailbroken phones is probably higher, and we certainly know in countries like China it's as high as 25% of all the phones are jailbroken. My recent experience in Jamaica was 100% of them are. But this poses a threat to enterprises because we've covered new categories of malware that we call jailbreak jammers. And these are tools that users who want to bring in a jailbroken or rooted device into the corporate network can use to cover their tracks. They effectively patch out old school static mobile device management products. They patch them out. They patch out content protection products, video products that stream data that have jailbreak detection and root detection in it. And that poses a huge threat if somebody brings one of those into the enterprise because they've effectively turned off all security. You can have apps that can sniff all the passwords. You have apps that could be backdoors or SSH servers running on that person's phone, basically connected to your internal wireless network.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. To me, the big threat on that is employees are coming in with these phones. They're told by the IT administrator they're not allowed access if their phone is jailbroken. So they're being sneaky and bringing this device in for their own convenience to do work. But what I don't think a lot of them realize is they're putting the entire corporation at risk.
I mean, it's a major way for APTs to get into an organization. I mean, now remember, they're going once their phone's jailbroken or rooted, they're downloading apps from anywhere
they want.
I mean, there's not even central marketplaces. Any website you can go use these tools to download apps. Who knows what's in them? I mean, backdoors, remote access Trojans, scanning systems that start scanning the internal network. You've basically just brought the enemy into your network.
You did. One of my favorites is you mentioned the reverse SSH tunnel. That's one of my favorites. Has a soft spot. So, I mean, something like that, you just turned off the firewall.
Effectively, yeah. And a modern phone today has about as much horsepower as a nice Linux server did 3 years ago. And I don't think anyone would let a random employee drop in a Linux server on the internal network that could have its own SSH server, a remote access Trojan,
encrypted traffic,
scanning tools. You just basically completely open your network up. And I don't think that employees recognize that. They just think, well, I can get games for free. I can make my background purple or whatever reason they chose to do that. My kid likes to play this game or what have you. Or, they want to change the operating system settings and things. And they don't think about the risk.
No, they don't. And the risk is very high. I think, not to forecast too far, but I think jailbreak jammers for 2014 are going to be a big thing. But we can talk about that in a later podcast.
Yeah. One of the things we have been doing at Marble is building dynamic detection and protection against jailbreak jammers. But let's talk about that in our 2014 season preview podcast, which will be the next one. So look out for that. Well, and now, dear listeners, it's time for discussion of trend number 6 in security and crime on the internet for 2013. This is one of my favorites, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Dave, how much money was lost?
Well, quite a bit, actually. It turns out that, let's just talk about the price trends first before we talk about the actual crime statistics. So at the beginning of 2013, January, I've been looking up at the charts. Bitcoin was trading for $13.50 per Bitcoin. As we record this podcast in December, what are we at here, the 13th? Bitcoin is hovering just under $1,000 a coin. It's $990 when I checked a few minutes ago. And a week or two ago, it hit about $1,200 a Bitcoin. So huge price increase over a year. That has also correlated with fraud and, in particular, theft and cybercrime, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. So
we've done some research.
A little bit of research, and I think one of the things I've been noticing about Bitcoin is as the complexity goes up every couple months, it becomes harder and harder for people to mine their own Bitcoins. So Why go spend a bunch of money mining Bitcoins when I think there's a couple labs out there that charge $20,000 for a decent bit mining rig where you can get a rate of return?
Mm-hmm.
Or you could just put your time and effort into stealing it.
It seems easier, doesn't it?
It seems a level of magnitude easier to steal Bitcoins, and that's why we see such astronomical numbers with the amount of Bitcoins that were either seized or lost.
So we went through 2013 publicly known thefts. So there are probably many more that have not been reported, but we came out with a total number of Bitcoins that had been stolen to date in 2013 as 122,240 Bitcoins stolen. At today's price, that's $122 million of Bitcoin stolen. As you said, seized. Now, when they took down Silk Road, the FBI seized out of that online marketplace 171,955 Bitcoins, which equates to about $170 million of Bitcoins seized. So the total we get is about $284 million worth of Bitcoins stolen or seized in 2013.
Yeah, that's a big number. You know, earlier in the podcast we were talking about banking fraud, and we didn't throw out any numbers relating to how much money was lost or seized, but $284 million worth of chattels. That's an astronomical number. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting to be on par with other forms of fraud that we've seen online.
Yeah, and I think that, well, we'll save it for 2014, but one of my early predictions, you can guess, is that we're going to see an increased adoption of Bitcoin, a lot of interest in it, but also a lot more crime, criminal applications, etc. We also did a bit of mathematics, and as far as we can tell, on one of the major exchanges, now there are many exchanges, but on one of the major exchanges, they're trading over $16 million of Bitcoin a day, which equates to $5.8 billion of Bitcoin being traded annually at current prices.
So that's billion with a capital B. That's a lot of money. I sure hope that all of the exchanges are fully secured, because these are now major trading houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, these aren't hobbyist exchanges. Once you're in that level of money, it's a different ballgame.
Well, and it's becoming slightly more legitimate. We've had hearings at up in the Hill, and they seem to be sort of saying, you know, Bitcoin could be okay. How do we regulate it and tax it? And interestingly, on December 5th, 2013, Bank of America Merrill Lynch came out with a report on Bitcoin with estimates and price targets, just like they would for any majorly traded stock on the NASDAQ or the Dow. And their price target for Bitcoin in this official Bank of America document is $1,300 a coin.
You know, if we're going to talk a little bit about markets and commodity trading, one of the interesting things, I'm not giving out any sort of advice to anybody, but I would suggest people look at the complexity changes that happen over time. They happen at regular intervals. They're pretty much published. I'm going to be really interested to see what happens to the price over time and if it correlates to that difficulty meter.
Yeah, well, what I did actually about a year or two ago is in the early days of Bitcoin, I was tracking how the thefts of Bitcoin back then would correlate to price drops, and there was a clear correlation there. I wonder if we'll see that in 2014. Well, it ought to be interesting.
So if I watch the price, if I watch the thefts, and I watch the complexities, I can figure out good times to buy and sell. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I am. And
I'll take my financial advice off the air.
Right. Well, that concludes our 2013 season review of electronic crime, malware, mobile threats landscape. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Everyone have a happy holiday season, and Our next podcast will be our 2014 predictions for mobile threats, electronic crime, and we'll probably sprinkle in a little Bitcoin too.
I hope so.
Bye, everyone.